Hello and welcome to week 6. So, last week was the death penalty, and it was interesting. A lot of you guys had a lot of good arguments, but your arguments were based on belief and opinion. Okay. When we are into a debate of a controversial subject and a controversial topic, you really do need to back up and support your stance with the data, with the research, and with the literature. There is a whole lot of literature out there, and I refer to link to the death penalty information page uh, that has a lot of information on the death penalty. LexisNexis has a lot of information on the death penalty, and there's been a whole lot of Supreme Court cases that are um, found that deal with the death penalty and the application of the death penalty and how the death penalty can be um, imposed or prohibited from being imposed. So when I asked about the execution of Taylor Robinson, the assassin of Charlie Kirk, I was hoping to see a whole lot of court cases and precedents, not opinions on, well, if we assassinate him, it's just going to increase if we execute him, it's just going to increase um, the rhetoric and the violence, and it's going to turn him into a martyr for the left. Okay. We could, when I was looking for, well, Coker v. Georgia stated that you had to commit another felony or be in the commission of a felony while murdering somebody. Firing a gun in the city limits, which is a felony, is not the spirit of Coker v. Georgia, in my opinion. Coker v. Georgia says that you have to. Coker v. Georgia was about the applying the death penalty to a rapist. So Mr. Coker had raped a woman and he was sentenced to die. And whether or not you believe that rape is a suitable punishment or the death penalty is a suitable punishment for rape, Coker v. Georgia says that you cannot be sentenced to death for committing a felony, that you actually have to kill somebody in the commission of another felony. I don't know that that rises. I don't know that firing a firearm inside the city limits rises to the level to meet the Coker v. Georgia standard. And you could have made that argument. There is a prohibition against executing those with low IQ or those who are mentally insane or mentally unstable. And there's an argument that could be made that sexual deviance could be a prohibition for the death penalty, because this Mr. Robinson was a furry. Yes, he was also involved in a relationship with a biological man who was in the middle of transitioning. There is no hate speech amendment to the death penalty. You cannot be sentenced to death for a hate crime. In fact, federal law, and I think that's what a lot of these people are wanting to do, is to sentence Mr. Robinson to the death penalty because he committed a hate crime. Federal law, and this was put together by George Bush or during the George Bush presidency. You can only The only punishment for a hate crime is an additional 5 years in prison. Okay. If you attach the hate crime label to the offense, all you can do is increase or impose an additional 5 years to the sentence. So, there's a whole lot of information to be able to make your argument for or against the death penalty. We could argue that what Mr. Robinson did was tantamount to treason because he assassinated a major proponent for the Republican Party. And this could be seen as an act of treason. You'd have to make that argument, but you make that argument. And it's important that we do make these arguments and we use the facts, we use the literature, we use precedent to back up our opinions. This is what made Charlie Kirk so infuriating to people. He backed up everything that he said with court cases, with the research, with statistics, with the Bible. And I was hoping to see that level of discourse. And from this point forward, I hope and expect to see that level of discourse to where you are backing up your stance and your position with the literature, with court cases, with precedents, with the facts, not opinion, not conjecture. Okay, so I didn't dock anybody for not doing this week. I just went through the basic. Did you give your original post? Did you provide citations in your original post? Did you reply to at least 3 people? And did you respond to at least 2 of those who replied to you? And that's how I graded. I didn't look into and I didn't take points away for not providing a well-reasoned debate or stance. So this week we're going to be talking about probation. And I have several years as a probation officer. It was part of my world. I like probation. And if I wasn't doing what I'm doing now, I would most likely be a probation officer. But we've got another thing. Let me share my screen. Let me see if I can get this right this time. Okay, so I want to go to my content screen. I'm going to share my content screen. Okay, and this is the main content screen. Now, it starts here on the main page. If you go down to week 8 and you click on the week 8, it's going to open up the things that are available for you. And there is an assignment due on week 8 that you probably need to get started on today if you haven't already done so. And this is your research paper outline. There go my cows. This is your research paper outline. If you have an approved research project that I approved, you can start working on your outline. It needs to be a Roman numerical, alphabetical, an alphanumeric outline for your research paper. And I've got an example of the outline of your assignment and how it's supposed to be. So your introduction, I need your opening statement. And this is the opening statement that's going to engage me to your project. Probably your very first paragraph and your thesis statement. What are you going to try to show me and teach me in this research paper? Technically, this research paper is only going to be the literature review, because we're not going to do any original research in this project or in this class. We'll save the actual research to other classes within the program. And again, if there's a class that you want me to teach, you'll need to petition Dr. Wilson. Okay, so, and then Roman numeral 2 is going to be your first supporting point that will support or prove your thesis statement and your opening statement. And then you need to provide evidence to back that up. Every paragraph needs to have a citation. Okay. In your actual paper, every paragraph has to have a citation where your statements, your opinion, your literature review is supported by the research. Yeah. And I guess this is a good time to start talking about what I'm expecting to see on your reference page. I'm expecting to see a minimum of 6 sources. One source is a book. It could be the textbook if you want to. One source must be a journal article. And the third source can be an internet source. Make sure that that internet source is a reliable, viable research source. Wikipedia is not authorized. If you use Wikipedia, you will automatically get a 0. Let me repeat that again so that you hear me. If you use Wikipedia, I will give you a 0 on your paper. You can use Wikipedia to find other sources because Wikipedia is a great place to find sources, but you can't use Wikipedia as your source. I want all of your sources to be primary sources. I do not want secondary sources. I do not want tertiary sources. Okay? And in fact, Wikipedia is primarily just an opinion page because I can go into Wikipedia and I can change it and I can make it say whatever I want. And until the editors go verify it, those changes are going to remain. So make sure that you do that. This is due in week 8, but I would suggest that you start getting, you can turn it in at any time. I suggest that you start getting working on this now. Okay, so if we go back to the main content page, I should just probably set this up as so that you see what you see. Okay, so this is in the student preview stage. And this is the content page. And we are in content page section 6, which is probation. In probation, we've got my lecture notes. We've got the PowerPoint that I'm about to present to you. You've got the quiz, and you have got the week 6 discussion. The week 6 discussion tells you, and it says, evaluate the measures of probation. If you were a probation officer, which outcome measures would you want to be judged by to evaluate your success as a probation officer? And then I want you to tell me why you have chosen this particular measure. And throughout the lecture that I'm about to give, and in all the information, these measures are going to be available. Okay, and I asked this because when I was a probation officer, I spent a lot of time in my boss's office learning how to become a probation officer. And one of the things that my supervisor told me was, well, they measured success off of recidivism rate. And we've been talking about recidivism rate. I've been talking about recidivism rate for a couple of weeks now as it pertains to my job. And the measure of success, my supervisor told me, if you have one defendant that you release from probation and they do not get rearrested within 3 years, you've had a successful career. And I find that statement just to be god awful horrible. Okay, I think and I believe and I stand that if we're going to use recidivism as a measure for success, that recidivism rate has to be below the national average. The national average right now is 66%. And I've discussed this already here in this class. 66% of the people who are released from prison return to prison or probation within 3 years. 84 out of 100 people return to prison or probation or some form of correctional supervision within 10 years. That's 84 out of 100 people return to correctional supervision within 10 years of being released from correctional supervision. And that is an absolutely horrible statement. That's an absolutely horrible statistic. And I think if I am going to be measured, my success is going to be measured by a measure of recidivism. That measure should be that my success rate should be greater than the national average. So the learning objectives for this session is to be able to define probation, to know its goals. We'll talk a little bit about the history of probation. We'll describe some of the characteristics of adults that are on probation. We'll explain the different ways that probation is administered. We evaluate how to evaluate probation, describe the investigative and supervision functions of a probation officer, explain MTRs. Probation is a conditional release from prison to the community under the supervision of a probation officer. It's conditional because it can be revoked if certain conditions are not met by the individual. Each and every probationee is given a contract that they must follow. And if they violate this contract, the agreement for probation can be revoked and you can be sent to prison. So the reason that we want to have probation is it permits a convicted person to remain in the community, to remain with their family, to help rehabilitate without going to prison. It avoids the institutionalization and the stigma of imprisonment. Okay. Prison is a hard, rough place. And if you don't have a strong moral code, as we discussed before, prison's going to make you worse. Probation is less expensive. We don't have to provide room. We don't have to provide board. We don't have to provide electricity. We don't have to provide water so that you can bathe and shower. It is more humane. And it is as effective as incarceration itself. Fair treatment for persons whose crimes do not meet incarceration. You don't want to send somebody who bounced a check to prison. You don't want to send somebody who has financial problems to prison because they're trying to figure out how to deal with their financial issues and problems. The goals of probation is to protect the community. So instead of putting somebody inside of a prison, they allow them to carry out court-imposed sanctions without being sent to prison. People who are convicted of 3G offenses are not typically allowed to be placed on probation. 3G offenses are those violent crimes, which include murder, kidnapping, aggravated rape, pedophilia. Probation supports crime victims because part of the payment or part of the requirement to be on probation is that you pay to be under supervision. And in that payment that you give, you have to pay back a fine and you have to pay back the victims of your crime. It coordinates and promotes the use of community resources. You know, we can get you into counseling. We can get you into adult education programs. We can do all those things in the community to help make you a more productive member of society without sending you to prison. You know, somebody who has a drinking problem, you don't want to put them in a prison cell with somebody who's a murderer, a rapist, or a pedophile. So probation in America developed in the 1800s. It was developed by a man by the name of John Augustus. He was a cobbler and he was in Boston, and he developed the conditions of probation, and he helped individuals with employment, with education, with housing. He established probation by going to the courtroom and saying, "Judge, Your Honor, I don't think this man belongs in prison. I will vouch for him. Please put him into my under my supervision. I will teach him how to be a cobbler, and I will give him a career. I will set him up in his own business, and he will become a productive member of society, and then he will no longer commit crime." So every time John Augustus wanted a new offender to supervise, he would go to the courts and he would say, "Hey, let me do this." This turned into the National Probation Act of 1925, which made probation a national institution and available across the country. There, for a while, probation was put in the sheriff's office, and one of the sheriff's deputies was responsible for watching over and protecting, or for the supervision of those people placed on probation. So some of the characteristics of adults that are on probation: 75% are male, 54% are white, 99% of those people on probation are state and local. And then the most serious offenses, a lot are drug and substance abuse, property, and then there's the violent crimes. At about 25%, it's equally split. And then you've got public disorder, like intoxication, public intoxication, causing a disturbance, breaching the peace, things like that. Okay, so the administration of adult probation in the United States, if you look at this chart, the tan is, it's part of the state executive branch, which means that they work for the executive branch. The blue is a combination of organized models. The red, which is where I'm living, this is part of the judicial agency. And when I worked for probation, my job was paid for by the county, but I reported to and I answered to the judge. And when I had a problem and I had a case, I would go to the judge. If I had a guy that just wasn't working, I'd file a motion to revoke and I'd go to the judge. But even before that, if I wanted to try something new with a defendant, I'll go to the judge and I sit in his office. I say, "Judge, this is my problem. This is what's going on, and this is how I want to remedy that. Is it possible? Is this something that we can do?" And normally the judges would say, "Yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Let's go ahead and do that." Okay, so recidivism, and this is what I was talking about before. Recidivism is the repetition of criminal behavior. It's generally defined as reoffending, getting rearrested, and the primary outcome measure for probation. Every probation department uses recidivism as their primary outcome measure. So this combines the control focused strategies with treatment strategies. It reduces recidivism rates for program participants. And this is where I'm sitting in this research that I'm currently doing, is which is, because probation has a whole lot of programs that are important to helping the defendant become a productive member of society. But all of the programs that I worked with when we were in probation, they were all secular programs. So my thought is, and where I'm at now is if we had a faith-based program, I wasn't allowed to talk about church. I wasn't allowed to talk about God when I was a probation officer. Now that I'm a chaplain, that's all I do 7 days a week. Every time I'm in the prison, I talk about God, I talk about the Bible, I talk about obedience. So we're looking for ways to decrease the recidivism rate. So there are almost 54,000 probation officers across the United States, and they have two primary roles: case investigation and client supervision. So every probation officer is responsible for filling out a pre-sentence investigation. They're responsible for filling out a pre-commitment investigation. And what these probation officers do is they investigate the crime and the offense. They look at the crime. They look at the different levels of responsibility depending on the state. But they talk to the victims. They find out what the victims want. They find out what kind of rehabilitation programs are available to this offender. They work a plan. They work a strategy for successful completion of probation. Or they decide and they say, there's nothing that we can do for this offender. We just need to send him to prison. Okay. And in my experience, 9 times out of 10, the judge would go along with the recommendations from the probation officer in their investigation into this case. They look into the remorse that's being held by the offender. They look into substance abuse. They look into the adverse childhood experiences. They look into, whether or not they believe this person can be rehabilitated. They look into the costs, the victim costs that were expected or that came across. And they look at all of these things and they create and they build this report. They send it to the judge, and the judge makes his sentencing decisions. The second part of probation is client supervision. Within client supervision, what we're doing is fulfilling or completing that report. So let's get into it a little more. Case investigation is interviewing the person that's charged with the crime and preparing a pre-sentence report. Okay. The pre-sentence report includes or assists the court in deciding a fair sentencing decision, as I said. It includes information on the current offense, the past adult and juvenile records. So when people tell you that your juvenile record is sealed, it is not. The probation officer has access to it, and then they will use that information to build a pre-sentence or pre-commitment report. They look at your family history, your family background, your background. They look at your education levels, your employment levels, your health issues. And the purpose of the pre-sentence report is to outline a treatment plan. The process of the pre-sentence report starts with the interview between the probation officer and the person charged with a crime, normally after conviction. The interview follows a structured format to obtain information about the offenses made by the individual. The probation officer estimates the offender's degree of risk to the community. There's an assessment that they take. It's called the risk needs. And you want to follow Jeremy Bentham's hedonistic approach, the offender calculus, the needs risk calculus, on whether the needs of the offender, the needs of the community outweigh the risks that Excuse me, I'm sorry. I had a very long weekend. Had a revival this weekend. Um, 4 sessions, 200 inmates per session. 20 people dedicated their lives to God and converted. 61 people were actually baptized yesterday. I averaged walking 10 miles a day inside the prison through this revival and helping and praying with people. So, and then my dog woke me up at 6 o'clock this morning. So it's been a long weekend. Supervision consists of resource mediation, surveillance, and enforcement. Resource mediation is providing a person on community supervision access to the resources that are available to them within the community, such as counseling, AA, NA, education issues, helping them find a job. Surveillance is monitoring the activities of a person on probation. When I had my not sex offender caseload, but when I had a substance abuse offender caseload, everybody got drug tested every time I saw them. If I saw them in the house, we went to the bathroom and we did a drug test. If they came to my office, they did a drug test. Each drug test cost $12.50. But we wanted to make sure that you were clean and sober. If you came back dirty, there would be issues. Enforcement, making individuals accountable for their behavior and making sure that they understand the consequences. One of those consequences is a motion revoked and being sent to prison. Okay, so the caseload standards. Okay, the intensive caseload is 20 to 1. Okay, well, when I had a substance abuse caseload, I had 60 people on my caseload. When I had the domestic violence caseload, I had close to 100 people on my caseload. When I supervised both, I had almost 150 people on my caseload. Moderate to high risk, you don't want any more than 50. Low risk, 201. Low risk offenders is that it's extremely unlikely that they're going to reoffend. So you put them on monthly reporting or every 3-month reporting or mail reporting. Okay, so you don't have to see them as much and as often. Intensive supervision cases, you have to see these people once a week. Moderate to high, you have to see them once a month. And then low risk is, you can see them every 3 months, every 6 months. They have to do monthly reporting through the mail. For juveniles, intensive is 15 to 1, moderate to high is 30 to 1, low risk is 100. Okay, there are 5 central principles for procedural justice: the voice, respect, trust, understanding, and neutrality. The technology helps probation officers track fines and probation payments, to be notified when clients are behind on payments, if probationers have satisfied the conditions of their sentences. They conduct kiosk reporting. They do alcohol detention, voice verification, face recognition tests, fingerprint, and other biological measures. All of these things are within the technology and the geographical information of the systems. Okay, so revocation of probation is a formal termination of an individual's conditional freedom. If they are revoked, they're sent to prison. Due process hearing that determines whether the conditions of probation have been violated before probation can be revoked. An individual can be removed from the community. You must follow due process. There's 3 types of triggers that will initiate a revocation process. And this is A, the failure to comply with conditions of probation, such as a curfew. If you're given a curfew and you don't follow it, you can be revoked and sent to prison. Fleeing the jurisdiction without permission. This is important. The jurisdiction is the county. And I was in San Angelo. I was a probation officer in San Angelo, and I was a probation officer down in Alpine. Okay, Alpine was an hour and a half, 2 hours away from your closest Walmart. So people would want to go to Walmart all the time, but they couldn't go to Walmart without first contacting me and calling me and tell me that they were coming to Odessa. If I found out or caught you in Odessa without my permission, you could find yourself in prison. I have a guy in the prison where I'm at. He'd been on probation for 9 years. He was almost done with his case, and he decided to go to Egypt during Ramadan. When he got back to the country, they arrested him and sent him to prison, and now he's having to serve a 10-year prison service sentence because he fled the jurisdiction without permission. Okay, a new offense violation. A new offense is an automatic motion to revoke. And if you get rearrested for anything, it will send you automatically to the revocation hearing. Conditions for revocations. You need to have a written notice of the charge. This is a motion to revoke. A disclosure of the evidence must be included in the motion to revoke. Okay. The opportunity to be heard in person. Okay. Once a motion to revoke is issued and it's signed off by the district attorney, it'll go to the judge. The judge will sign an arrest warrant. You are arrested and you are held in court. You are held in jail until you get a chance to go to court and to answer or to rebuke the charges that the probation officer has provided. Okay, you have the right to confront and cross-examine witnesses. These witnesses, 9 times out of 10, I was the only witness to the case. If there was a new charge or a new offense, the police officer was brought to testify. If it was drug-related, the person at the lab, the person who tested the blood or urine could be called to testify. And the offender had the right to confront and cross-examine witnesses. They have the right to judgment by detached or neutral hearing body. You could request a jury hearing, but 9 times out of 10, if you called the jury, it was a rubber stamp, and they would this jury would just go ahead and send you to prison. A written statement for the reasons for revoking probation, and then you have the right to counsel. Okay, so that is my discussion and lecture for the day. So you can see the sun's getting mighty bright already. So I would like to see an increase in using citations, in-text citations in your original posts, a list of sources. And then for your initial response, I would also like to see a list of sources and in-text citations. We need to start this discussion on probation throughout this class, using information to back up your stance. We need to avoid opinion and thoughts and beliefs because they become emotional. We need to back everything up with the literature, with research, and with the facts. So with that in mind, I am looking for my mouse. There it is. I am going to stop recording. So I hope that you guys have a great week, and I'll see you in the forums.